Nadia did not expect the hall to be so quiet. 3 years of standing beside Caden, 3 years of packed gatherings, of learning which elder to greet first, of knowing which seat at the long table was hers without being told, and none of it had prepared her for the way the silence fell when he stepped forward. She had dressed carefully that morning. Not because she was afraid. Because she believed in things. She believed in effort. She believed that love, shown consistently and without drama, was eventually returned. She had built her entire life on that belief the way some people build on rock. The bonding ceremony was held in the old hall, the one with stone walls and no windows, the one that smelled of pine resin and old fire. Every elder sat along the curved walls. Every senior pack member stood behind them. Nadia stood at the front, to the left of the ceremonial stone, the place where the chosen mate always stood. Caden walked in from the far door. He was striking in the way that powerful men sometimes are, not because of any single feature, but because of the way he occupied space. He moved like someone who had never once been uncertain. Nadia had loved that about him, once. She had mistaken it for steadiness. He did not look at her when he entered. She noticed that. She filed it away in the back of her mind the way you file a small pain, quietly, without fuss, because there are people watching. Elder Gwen stood at the center stone and began the opening words of the ceremony. Nadia had heard them practiced. She knew the rhythm. She waited for her name. Caden looked at the elder. Then he looked at the floor. Then he looked up and across the room, past Nadia entirely, to a woman standing near the far wall. Her name was Lyra. She had rank. She had bloodline. She had the kind of visible, documented power that the elders could point to on a chart. She had never once spoken to Nadia without looking slightly past her shoulder, as though the real conversation might be happening behind her. When Caden spoke, his voice was steady. No hesitation. No apology in the sound of it. He named Lyra. Nadia heard it the way you hear news of something terrible, not all at once, but in pieces, each one arriving separately. His voice. The name. The meaning of the name. The silence that opened up around her when everyone in the room understood what that name meant for her. She did not move. She stood in the place where the chosen mate stood and she did not move, because moving would have meant accepting that this was real, and her body had not yet agreed to that. Elder Gwen completed the words. The ceremony moved forward. It did not pause for Nadia. Ceremonies do not pause for the person they are dismantling. Lyra crossed the hall. She stood at the center stone. She spoke her acceptance. She was graceful and composed and entirely unaware, or entirely uncaring, of what she had stepped into. Nadia watched it happen. She was aware of every person in the room not looking at her. That is its own particular thing, the effort of a crowd choosing not to witness. She could feel the deliberate angles of their attention, each one pointed carefully away. Her hands, she discovered, were cold. She thought about that. About the specific sensation of cold hands when the rest of you is burning. About how strange the body is, the way it goes practical in moments that should be anything but. When Lyra finished her acceptance and Caden turned to face the elders, Nadia moved. Not fast. Not dramatically. She did not storm out or collapse or make a sound. She turned from the stone and she walked toward the door at the back of the hall, the one she had entered through, and the sound of her own footsteps on the stone floor was the only thing she could clearly hear. She kept her shoulders level. She kept her chin up. She kept her hands loose at her side instead of pressed into fists the way they wanted to be. She counted the steps. It was something to do with her mind while her mind was otherwise falling apart. 12 steps to the door. She had counted 11 when someone fell into step beside her. She did not look. She knew the footsteps, not consciously, but in the way you know the sounds of people who have existed in your daily life for years without ever being the center of it. A steady, unhurried stride. Not rushing to catch her. Just there. Declan. Caden's best friend. His beta. The man who had stood 3 feet to Caden's right at every gathering Nadia had ever attended. She knew his face the way she knew the furniture in the hall, as part of a room she had been allowed to occupy, not as something she had ever considered separately. She did not look at him. He did not speak. They walked out of the hall together, and the door swung shut behind them, and the sound of it closing was the quietest, most final thing she had ever heard. Outside, the air was cold and sharp and clean in the way that only night air is. Nadia stood on the stone steps and breathed it in. Once. Twice. The third breath shook a little. She controlled the fourth. She still did not look at Declan. He stood one step below her, which put them at almost the same height, and he faced outward, not toward her, not making her feel observed. Just standing there, like a person who had decided this was where he was going to be and saw no need to explain it. She waited for him to say something. Some version of "I'm sorry," or "that was wrong," or "I don't know what he was thinking." Something she would have to respond to, something that would require her to perform composure she was not sure she had left. He did not say anything. After a while, the cold became ordinary. The shaking in her third breath did not come back. She looked at her hands. The cold had gone from them. They were just hands now, at the ends of her arms, belonging to a person who had just been publicly unclaimed in front of everyone who knew her name. She thought, "I am still here." It surprised her, almost. Not the fact of it, she had not expected to cease existing, but the quality of it. She was still here and she was still herself and the ground was still under her feet and those things, taken together, were more than nothing. She said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "I need to go home." Declan said, "I know." 2 words. That was it. No offer to walk her. No asking if she was all right. Just acknowledgement. Just proof that he had heard her and that it mattered. She walked down the steps and across the courtyard and out through the gate alone. She did not hear his footsteps behind her. But when she turned the corner onto her street and allowed herself, finally, to stop walking, when she pressed her back against the stone wall of her building and let the cold of it soak through her coat, she found that she was not crying. She was thinking. She was thinking about what it meant to have loved someone for 3 years and been invisible to them the entire time. She was thinking about the difference between being present and being seen. She was thinking about how easy it was to confuse a man's tolerance of your presence with his attention to your existence. She had been so certain. That was the part she could not put down. Not the rejection, she could trace the shape of that, learn to live alongside it. But the certainty. She had been so certain she knew what she was to him. She had been wrong in the most thorough way. Not wrong about a detail. Wrong about the whole picture. She stood against the wall for a long time. Then she went inside. She made herself tea she did not drink. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at the grain of the wood and thought about nothing for a while, which was the kindest thing she could do for herself. At some point, she slept. When she woke up, it was still dark and her coat was still on and the tea was cold on the table. She was still herself. She got up and took off her coat and put the cold tea down the drain. Then she stood at her window and watched the sky begin, very slowly, to lighten at the edges, and she made the only decision that mattered. She was not going to let this be the thing that ended her. It was going to be the thing that started the next part. She did not know yet what the next part looked like. She was, for the first time in 3 years, genuinely curious to find out. Declan showed up the next morning with bread. Not flowers. Not words. Not the long, heavy speech Nadia had been half expecting from someone, anyone, in the park who felt the social obligation to address what had happened in that hall. Bread. From the baker on the lower street. Still warm, wrapped in cloth, sitting in his hands like it was the most ordinary delivery in the world. Nadia stared at it through the gap in her door. She said, "Why?" He said, "You probably haven't eaten." She had not eaten. She had not thought about eating. She had spent the morning sitting at her table with a blank piece of paper in front of her that she had intended to write something on and had not. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He put the bread on the counter. He did not make himself comfortable, He stood near the door with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the window while she cut a piece of bread and ate it standing up because sitting down felt like too much effort. It was good bread. Soft in the middle. Slightly salted crust. She ate it and she did not say thank you, and he did not require her to. He left before she finished the second piece. This is how it began. Not with a conversation. Not with a moment she could point to later and say that was when. It began with bread, and then 3 days later with a fire he built in her heart without asking because she had run out of wood and the morning was cold, and then with the way he appeared at her door in the evenings sometimes and simply sat in her second chair by the window and read his own book while she read hers. He never asked how she was doing. That was the thing she noticed most. Everyone else asked. Every member of the pack who caught her in the market or the meeting hall asked some version of it. How are you holding up? Or are you doing all right? Or if you need anything, and each one required her to perform a version of fine that cost something every time. Declan never asked. He just arrived. He just stayed for a while. He just left when it seemed like she had had enough of another person's presence for one day, which he seemed to know before she did. It took her almost 2 weeks to realize she was looking forward to it. Not to him specifically, or not yet. To the fact of a person who did not need anything from her. Who did not need her to explain herself or reassure him or perform her recovery for his comfort. Who sat in her second chair and read his book and was simply, quietly, undramatically present. She had not known how exhausted she was from being needed in small ways until someone stopped needing her. One evening, maybe 3 weeks after the ceremony, she looked up from her book and said, "Don't you have other things to do?" He looked up from his. Yes. She looked back at her book. All right. He looked back at his. Neither of them moved. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. It surprised her, the impulse. She had not expected to find anything amusing for a long time. She was not sure what to do with it. She let it go. It was not a big thing. Just a small, quiet thing. The kind that plants itself without ceremony and grows slowly in the dark. The pack, of course, noticed. Nadia had lived among these people long enough to understand how they processed information. In public, everything was dignified and correct. In private, everything was observed and catalogued and discussed. She had been the subject of their observation before, as Cadence intended, then as the woman Caden had replaced. Now she was becoming the woman who had Declan in her kitchen, which was a new category, and they were not sure what to do with it. She found she did not particularly care. That, too, surprised her. 3 years of caring very much what the pack thought, of dressing appropriately and speaking carefully and being visible in the right ways, and she had arrived somewhere on the other side of the ceremony where their opinion felt like weather. Present. Occasionally inconvenient. Not worth reorganizing her life around. Caden's name floated through conversations around her like something left behind in a room. She heard it. She did not follow it. She was too busy noticing other things. The way Declan took his tea, no sweetener, a long sip, always too hot when he started drinking it and seemingly unbothered by that. The way he never filled the silence just to fill it. The way he listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually tracking what she said, holding it, sometimes returning to it days later with a thought he had been quietly working on since. She had never been listened to like that. She had mistaken many things for listening, she realized. Caden had heard her. He had processed the fact of her words. But he had never done what Declan did, which was receive them. Keep them. Treat them as things that mattered beyond the moment they were said. It was disorienting. To be seen that clearly by someone she had not been looking at. One afternoon in the 4th week, she said to him, "You were always there. All those years. Why didn't I notice you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were looking somewhere else." No accusation in it. Just a statement of fact, delivered the way he delivered most things, without performance, without the need for her to respond in any particular way. She sat with it. She said, "I'm looking now." He met her eyes then, and held them, and did not say anything because nothing needed to be said. That evening, when he left, she stood at her window and watched him walk down the street, and she thought about what it meant to choose a person. Not to be chosen. Not to fall by accident or by the mathematics of proximity. But to look at someone clearly, knowing everything it cost the last time, and to choose. It was a terrifying thing. She decided to do it anyway. She did not tell him in words, not yet. She told him the way people who are not good at declarations tell each other things, in small continuous acts. She saved a chair by the window for him. She started keeping the tea he preferred. She told him things she had not told anyone, not because she could not carry them alone, but because it turned out she preferred not to. He received every piece of it the same way. Steadily. Without drama. Like someone who had been prepared to wait as long as necessary and found, to his quiet satisfaction, that the wait was ending. They did not mark the moment they became something. There was no ceremony. No announcement. No standing before elders to have their bond named and recorded. One morning he was there when she woke up, reading in the chair by the window, and she stood in the doorway of her bedroom and looked at him and thought, "This is what I chose." And it felt nothing like what she had expected love to feel like when she was younger and did not understand the difference between wanting to be wanted and actually wanting a person. It felt like solid ground. It felt like something she could build a life on. She went to put the kettle on. He heard her moving in the kitchen and looked up and said good morning the way people say it when they mean it. She said it back. Outside, somewhere in the park's halls, Caden was told about it. She heard about his reaction secondhand, through the particular silence that fell over certain conversations when she entered the room. She did not ask for details. She did not need them. She already knew what he would feel. Not love, she had let go of the idea that what Caden felt for her had ever been love. But something else. Something smaller and more corrosive. The particular frustration of a person who had never valued a thing until someone else had it. She hoped, without spite, that he would grow out of it. She went back to her kitchen. Declan was still in the chair. The kettle began to whistle. She poured 2 cups. She had not done that automatically before. She noticed that she did it now without thinking, the way you do things that have become natural, the way the body learns something the mind has quietly accepted as true. 2 cups. She carried them both to the window and set his on the table beside him and sat in her own chair and opened her book. He said nothing. She said nothing. Outside, the morning continued to happen. Inside, something warm and unhurried and entirely has settled into the room and stayed. She did not examine it too closely. Some things are better understood by living inside them than by taking them apart. She turned a page. He drank his tea. The first sign was the birds. Nadia had always had a certain sensitivity to the mood of a room. She had assumed it was observation, the habit of a person who had learned early to read the emotional weather of those around her before it became a storm. She had never thought of it as unusual. Everyone paid attention. She just paid more than most. But the birds were something else. She woke up 3 mornings in a row to find every bird in the courtyard below her window had gone completely silent at precisely the moment she opened her eyes. Not startled silent, not the silence of a cat nearby. A deliberate, listening quiet, as though the air itself had changed register. She mentioned it to no one. Then came the symbols. She had been organizing the park's older records, a task Elder Gwen had assigned her months before the ceremony and which she had continued partly out of habit, partly because it gave her something to do with her hands on evenings when her thoughts grew too loud. The records were kept in the archive room below the meeting hall, old books, older scrolls, some things so fragile that turning their pages felt like an argument with time. She had been through these records before. She knew their contents. She had catalogued them. But on a Tuesday afternoon in the 7th week, she turned to a page she had definitely catalogued before and found herself reading it. Not reading around it, not registering the presence of text while her mind was elsewhere. Reading. The symbols on the page, old, prepacked script that no one alive had been formally taught to decode, resolved themselves in her mind as clearly as words in her own language. She read the entire page before she realized what she was doing. She set the book down. She picked it up again. She read it again. Still clear. Still complete. A passage about bloodlines, about inherited gifts, about women who carried something in them that older generations had named and protected. She closed the book. She sat in the archive room for a long time with her hands flat on the table and the dust motes moving in the beam of light from the high window and her heart doing something careful and controlled inside her chest. She did not tell Declan that evening. She did not know how to frame it. She did not want to say the words until she understood what the words meant, because half-formed things, spoken too soon, had a way of becoming something different from what they actually were. Instead she said, "Do you know anything about the old bloodlines? The ones before the alpha hierarchy was formalized?" He looked up from his book. He considered the question the way he considered everything, without rushing, without filling the space before he was ready. He said, "Some. The elders know more." She said, "Elder Gwen." He said, "She would be the one." Nadia nodded and went back to her page and said nothing more about it that night. She went to Elder Gwen the following morning. The old woman lived at the edge of the park's territory, in a house that had been built before anyone currently living could remember. It sat on a small rise in the ground with a garden that had grown so long untended that it had become its own thing, not wild exactly, but self-organized, arranged by some logic that was not human. Nadia knocked. The door opened before the sound of the knock had finished. Elder Gwen looked at her without surprise. She said, "I was wondering when you'd come." She said it the way you say something you have been holding for a while and are relieved to finally sit down. Nadia followed her inside. The house was warm and dense with the smell of old things, not unpleasant, just layered in the way that spaces accumulate history in their walls. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on every wall. Books, yes, but also objects, small carved pieces, bundles of dried plant matter, glass containers holding things Nadia could not name. Elder Gwen put 2 cups on the table without asking whether Nadia wanted one. Nadia sat. She said, "The archive symbols. I read them." Elder Gwen sat across from her. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She said, "I know." Nadia said, "How?" The old woman looked at her steadily. Not with the careful, managed look of someone about to deliver news. With the direct, clear look of someone who has been waiting to say a true thing. She said, "Because they were written for women like you to find. They do not resolve themselves for everyone. Only for those with the blood." Nadia was quiet. She said, "What blood?" And that was when Elder Gwen began to talk. She talked for a long time. Nadia did not interrupt. She listened the way Declan had taught her, without preparing her response, without organizing the information into categories as it arrived. Just receiving it. The heart keepers were not a story most people in the park knew. They were a fact that had been quietly set aside over 2 centuries, not erased, but deprioritized, the way things that complicate a simple power structure tend to be deprioritized until the power structure finds them useful again. They predated the alpha system by generations. They were the women who had made the original pack possible, not by leading it in the visible way, not by holding the recognized title, but by providing the one thing a pack could not function without long-term legitimacy. Moral center. The anchor that held the social order to something older and deeper than strength alone. The heart keepers' gifts were not showy. They were not about force. They were about knowing, reading the emotional truth beneath the spoken word, feeling the condition of a room before entering it, understanding symbols that carried memory in their shapes rather than conventional meaning. And one thing more, which Elder Gwen named last and set apart from the others. A heart keeper's recognition of a leader legitimized his reign in the original law of the pack. Without it, a king's authority was provisional. Functional, perhaps. Accepted on the surface. But incomplete in the old way, the deep way, the way that the oldest pack members could feel in their bones even if they no longer had the vocabulary to name it. Nadia sat with this. She said, "Did Kaden know?" Elder Gwen looked at her for a long moment. She said nothing. Which was answer enough. Nadia let that settle. She let it move through her, the way cold water moves through a system, finding every corner, making itself known in places she had not expected. She thought about 3 years. She thought about the specific quality of how Caden had kept her close. Not the warmth of genuine attachment, she understood now. Something more like maintenance. Like a person who keeps a candle burning not because they love the light but because they have a practical use for it, and replacing it would be complicated. She thought about the ceremony. About the name he had spoken instead of hers. She thought he miscalculated. Not about her value, he had never, apparently, understood her value. He had miscalculated about what her absence would cost him. She said, very quietly, he rejected the one person who could make his role complete. Elder Gwen said, yes. She said, and now? The old woman tilted her head. Now it depends on what you want. Nadia looked at her hands on the table. They were not shaking. She noticed that. She filed it away in the place where she was keeping track of the evidence of who she was becoming. She said, I need time to understand what I am. Elder Gwen nodded once. Then take it. Nadia came back every morning for 2 weeks. She read. She practiced. She sat very still in the archive room with the old books open around her and learned what her mind could do, the edges of it, the shape of it, the specific things the blood carried and how to hold them without being overwhelmed by them. It was not easy. It was not dramatic either. It was the quiet, incremental work of learning something real, which has never been glamorous and is always harder than you expect and more worth it than you feared. She told Declan on the 14th day. She told him all of it. She sat across from him at her kitchen table with her hands wrapped around her cup and she said it plainly, from the beginning, without softening it or managing his reaction in advance. He listened without speaking. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, so you've always carried this? She said, yes. He said, and Caden? She said, knew something. Maybe not the full shape of it. But something. He was quiet again. A longer quiet this time, and she let him have it, because she understood now what his silences were, not absence, but processing. The way he honored a thing by giving it real thought before he responded. He said, does it change anything for you? About us? She looked at him. She said, no. He held her gaze. She held his. He said, all right. That was the whole conversation. 2 syllables. All right. Which meant, I hear you, I am not afraid of this, I am still here, proceed. She loved him for that. Not for the first time, but in a new way, the way you discover a new room in a house you thought you knew completely. She went back to the archive room the next morning. And the one after that. And slowly, like light coming in through a window that has been closed a long time, she began to understand what she was for. Not for Caden. Not for the park's comfort or the elders' convenience or the maintenance of a power structure that had arranged itself to minimize her. For herself, first. For the truth of what she carried. For the specific, irreplaceable thing that ran in her blood and had waited, patiently, in the dark, for years, for her to find it. She was still finding it when the knock came. She was in the archive room on a grey morning, book open, hands warm around her cup, when Elder Gwen appeared in the doorway with her coat still on and her face arranged in the expression of someone delivering news that cannot be delayed. She said, he is coming. Nadia looked up. She said, when? Elder Gwen said, tomorrow. Nadia closed the book. She set her cup down carefully. She said, good. And she meant it. He did not send word first. That was the first thing Nadia noticed, not a messenger, not a formal request through the elders, not any of the protocols that govern the movement of an alpha king between territories. Just a knock at her door, plain and unannounced, like a man who had driven through the night and was not sure of his reception and had decided the directness of arriving without warning was better than giving her time to prepare a refusal. She was at the kitchen table when she heard it. She knew who it was before she reached the door. Not through the heartkeeper sense, through simple logic. Only one person would knock without sending word. Only one person would choose to come to her door rather than summon her, because summoning her now, after everything, would have required him to acknowledge in advance what he was asking. She opened the door. Caden stood on her steps. He looked like himself. That was the first, small shock. She had half expected to find him diminished in some visible way, as though the consequences of what he had done would have marked him outwardly. But he looked exactly like the man she had loved for 3 years. Same face, same height, same way of standing that said he owned the ground beneath his feet. She felt nothing dramatic. She noticed that. No rush of old feeling, no violence of anger, no chest-tightening grief. Just recognition. The same feeling as seeing an old photograph, acknowledging that a thing was real, that it had happened, that it was finished. She said, "Come in." She stepped back. He came inside. He stood in her kitchen, which Declan had built a shelf in 3 weeks ago, because she had too many books and not enough places to put them, and it was visible from the door, and he looked at the room the way people look at a space they are visiting for the first time, taking in the details of it. Nadia sat at the table. She did not offer him tea. He sat across from her. He was quiet for a moment. She let the moment exist. She did not feel it. He said, "I made a mistake." She said, "I know." He looked at her. A small thing moved behind his eyes, not surprise, exactly. Something more like the recalibration of a person who has expected to explain more before being understood. He said, "I didn't see you clearly." She said, "No." He said, "I would like to correct that." She waited. He said, "What I have with Lyra, it's not what I thought it would be." He stopped. He started again. "That's not the point. The point is I was wrong about you. I understand that now." She looked at him. She said, "What made you understand it?" He was quiet. She said, "Because I need to know whether you understand it because you genuinely see me now, or whether you understand it because something changed about what you need." He did not look away. She gave him credit for that. He said, "Both." She sat with that. She said, "That is the first honest thing you have said to me." He did not argue it. She said, "I know about the Heartkeeper bloodline." He was very still. She said, "I know what it means for your reign. I know that the old law requires my recognition to make your authority complete. I know that without it, you have a throne but not the full weight of what a throne is supposed to carry." She paused. "I know that Elder Gwen told you this before the ceremony." He looked at the table. Then back at her. He said, "She told me there was a woman in the park." She described the markers, the sensitivity, the ability to read old script, the instinctive knowledge. She was not specific. "I thought," he stopped. She said, "You thought it was Lyra." He said, "Her bloodline documentation was more prominent." Nadia said, "And when you realized it wasn't?" He said, 3 weeks after the ceremony. The elders started asking questions. Lyra could not read the archive symbols. She could not. He stopped again. He put his hands on the table. "I had let you walk out of that hall. I had let you." He did not finish the sentence. She said, "You had rejected me in front of everyone who knew my name because you chose status over sight. And then you discovered that the status you chose did not carry what you needed, and the person you rejected did." He said nothing. She said, "I need you to understand something. I am not angry with you." He looked at her with something that might have been hope. She said, "I am not angry because I don't have room for it anymore. I have used that space for other things. But I need you to understand that whatever you want from me now, it cannot be built on what you want me to be for your reign. It would have to be built on who I actually am. And I am no longer the woman who stood in that hall waiting for your name." He said, "I know that." She said, "Do you?" He looked at her for a long time. He said, "You are with Declan." She said, "Yes." He said, "He is my best friend." She said, "I know." He breathed in. He breathed out. It was a difficult moment and she could see that it was difficult and she did not soften it. He said, if I asked you, not for the sake of the rain, not for the legitimacy. If I asked you as a person who was wrong about the most important thing, would there be any way? She said, no. Not cruelly. Not with heat. Just clearly. She said, that closed. I did not close it in anger. I did not close it in grief. I let it close naturally, the way something does when it has been finished long enough. She looked at him directly. I chose something real. I am not giving it up. He was quiet for a long time. He said, does he know you came? She said, Declan is in the hallway. Caden went very still. She said, I told him you were coming. He is here because I wanted him here. He has not said a word, which is exactly like him. She looked at the door that led to the hall. Then back at Caden. You came to my house asking for something. I think you should know exactly what you are asking, and who you are asking in front of. She stood up. She said, you can have the legitimacy. You can have the heartkeeper's recognition. I am not withholding it out of spite, because it is not something I hold as a weapon. I carry it as a responsibility. She straightened. But you cannot have it on your terms. You cannot have it on the assumption that I owe you anything. If I give it, it is because the pact deserves the stability, and because the old law serves a real purpose, and because I have decided, freely, as myself, owing you nothing, that it is the right thing to do. She looked at him. She said, that is a different thing from what you came here for. Caden said, yes. She said, good. Then we understand each other. He stood. He looked at her in the way that she recognized now, the look of someone seeing something clearly for the first time and knowing that the clarity has come too late to change the outcome. He had the grace to hold the look without flinching. He said, I am sorry. Not for the rain. For you. She said, I know. He walked to the door. He opened it. Declan was there, leaning against the far wall of the hallway, coat on, book in his hand that she was entirely certain he had not been reading. He looked at Caden and Caden looked at him, and there was between them the particular silence of two men who have known each other for a very long time and are on the other side of something that cannot be undone. Caden said, December. Declan said, Kai. Nothing else. But it was enough. In the way that long friendships survive their hardest moments, not by pretending they did not happen, but by acknowledging them with the minimum of words and choosing, slowly, to continue. Caden walked down the hall. The door at the end opened and closed. Declan came back into the kitchen. He set his book on the shelf he had built. He looked at her. She said, Are you all right? He said, Are you? She thought about it. She said, Yes. He nodded once. She put the kettle on. Nadia called the gathering herself. She sent word through Elder Gwen, not through the Alpha's office, not through the former pack channels that ran through Caden's administration. Through the Elder Network. Through the women who had been keeping the archive for 200 years. Through the channels that had existed before the current hierarchy and would exist after it. She asked for the old hall. She got it. The morning of the gathering was overcast in the particular way that mornings are overcast before they clear, not fully dark, not committed to storm. Just waiting. Nadia dressed without ceremony. Practical clothes. Flat shoes. Hair back because she needed her hands free and she needed her face visible and she needed nothing between her and the room she was about to walk into. Declan was at the table when she came out. He said, Ready? She said, Yes. He stood. He did not ask if she wanted him there. He had understood, from the first morning he had appeared at her door with bread, that the way to be present for a person is not to ask permission every time but to read correctly when presence is wanted. She wanted him there. They walked to the old hall. It was full. That surprised her, not the number, but the quality of the room. She had half expected the formal, managed silence of a pack gathering where everyone knew the official agenda and was performing their engagement with it. This was different. This was the listening silence of a room that does not know what is coming and is genuinely waiting to find out. The elders sat along the curved walls, as they always did. The senior pack members stood behind them, as they always did. Caden was at the far end, not at the ceremonial stone, not at the alpha's position. Just in the crowd. She had not specified where he should stand. He had made that choice himself. She noted it. She fired it. Lyra was not present. Nadia had not excluded her. She had simply not been among those Elder Gwen had called, and no one had thought to include her through another channel, and that was a fact without malice, simply a reflection of whose network this gathering ran through. Nadia walked to the center. She did not stand at the ceremonial stone. She stood slightly to the left of it, in the open floor, which was not a traditional position. It was not a throne position, not a petitioner's position. It was simply a place in the middle of a room, where you could see every face and every face could see yours. She let the quiet settle. Then she spoke. She told them about the Heartkeeper bloodline without drama and without pause. She said it plainly, the way you say something true, without softening it, without emphasizing the parts that were inconvenient for anyone in the room, without protecting anyone's dignity at the cost of accuracy. She said, this bloodline is real, it is mine, and it has been present in this pack and ignored for 200 years. She said, the old law that governs the relationship between a Heartkeeper and an Alpha King is not ceremonial. It is functional. It defines the nature of legitimate authority in a way that no one alive fully remembered until now. She watched the room as she spoke. Some faces were surprised. Some were not. The elders, for the most part, were the not surprised ones. They had known the shape of the old law even if they had not known who carried the bloodline. Caden's face was composed. She respected him, a little, for that. She said, the Heartkeeper Accord has not been invoked in 2 centuries. Under its terms, the Heartkeeper's role is not subordinate to the Alpha King. It is not decorative. It is not a matter of who stands beside whom at ceremonies. She paused. She said, under the Accord, the Heartkeeper holds the right to name the terms of her recognition. Her acknowledgement of a ruler's legitimacy is given freely or it is not given. It is not owed. It is not assigned. It is not something that can be requested the way you request a signature on a document. She looked at Caden when she said this. He held her gaze. She said, I am invoking the accord now. Not to withhold my recognition from this pack's king. Not out of grievance, which would be a small reason for a serious thing. But because the terms under which I exercise this role are mine to set, and they have not been set for 200 years, and that absence has created a system in which a woman carrying this bloodline could be publicly dismissed without consequence. She let that sit. She said, the terms are these. She named them one by one. First, the Heartkeeper's Council is formal and recorded. Not optional, not advisory in the way that can be ignored, recorded, with equal weight to the Alpha's formal decisions in matters that concern the whole pack. Second, the women of the archive are recognized. Not as historical preservation volunteers. As an active, functional part of the pack's governance structure, with access to the same resources and protection as any former office. Third, the Heartkeeper's bond and household are inviolate. Whatever she chooses, whoever she stands with, is under the same protections as the Alpha household. Not comparable, equivalent. She named Declan by name when she said this. She heard the small shift in the room's breathing. She did not acknowledge it. She said, these are the terms of my recognition. They are not negotiable as a set. They can be discussed in their details. But the principle, that the Heartkeeper's role is active, named, and protected, is not something I am offering for vote. She looked at Elder Gwen. Elder Gwen, who had been alive for more years than anyone in that room had been responsible for anything, looked back at her with an expression that was not quite a smile and was entirely approval. Nadia said, I am asking for the pack's acknowledgement, not its permission. There is a difference. The room was quiet for a long time. Then Elder Gwen stood. She said, "The accord is recognized." And then, one by one, the other elders stood. Not quickly. Not all together, in the performed unity of a choreographed moment. Individually, each at their own pace, each making a private choice that became visible when they rose. By the time the last of them was on their feet, the room had changed. Caden stood. He did not speak. He inclined his head, not the nod of a superior acknowledging a subordinate. Something more careful. The acknowledgement of an equal who has accepted the terms of a negotiation they had not expected to lose. She had not come to win against him. She had come to build something that could outlast all of them. There was a difference. She hoped he understood it. She looked at him long enough for him to read in her face that she meant no cruelty. That she had not built this as a cage for him. That she had built it as a structure within which something better than the old arrangement could grow, if he had the steadiness to participate in it honestly. He looked back at her. He said, quietly enough that only the people closest heard it, "You would have been good for this pack from the beginning." She said, "I am good for this pack now." He said nothing more. She turned from the center of the room. Declan was standing at the edge of the crowd. He had not moved during any of it, not nodded along, not looked around to read the room's responses. He had watched her, only her, with the same quality of attention he had always given her. The kind that cost something. The kind that was a choice every moment it continued. She walked to him. He said, low and only for her, "That was extraordinary." She said, "I had good material." He looked at her. She said, "You taught me what it felt like to be genuinely listened to." It turns out that changes what you're willing to accept. He took her hand. She let him. They walked out of the old hall together, through the same door she had walked through alone the night everything she thought she had was taken from her. The stone steps were the same steps. The courtyard was the same courtyard. The cold air was the same cold air. Everything else was different. She stood on the steps for a moment and breathed in the morning. She did not look back at the hall. She did not need to. What had happened inside it was not behind her. It was part of her now, the way everything real becomes part of you once you have the courage to stand inside it fully. Declan stood beside her. She said, "What do you want for breakfast?" He said, "Whatever's in the kitchen." She said, "We need to go to the market first." He said, "All right." They went down the steps. They turned onto the street. The market was 3 blocks away and the morning was ordinary and cold and entirely hers. She did not look back once. She was done looking back. Every direction that mattered was forward, and forward was right here, in the ordinary cold morning, with a man who had brought her bread when she needed it most and asked for nothing that she had not freely offered. She had been rejected in that hall. She had chosen her own way forward. Her blood had remembered what she was. And now the world was going to have to learn it too.